Well, hello, and a very warm welcome back to the Andrew Eborn Show with me, Andrew Eborn, and I'm joined yet again by the wonderful Vicky Pryce. How are you doing, Vicky?
I'm doing fine. I'll spend the morning sort of watching my grandchildren play football. So there we go.
And you're off to see the big match later as well.
I am, and it's really quite interesting because I was watching the also while I was also watching the football, of course, the Kunzberg show, and Piers Morgan was on it, saying the most important event this week has nothing to do with the budget. It's all to do with Arsenal playing against Chelsea, and Arsenal will win. So anyway, I'm a
Well, there
Chelsea
you go. Well, at
supporter.
least one of you is going to be happy, or maybe it's a draw. We'll
Yeah,
see what happens. What's your
well,
prediction for the match?
I'm always very pessimistic about Chelsea, so I'm pleasantly surprised when we do well.
Okay, all good stuff. Well, I'll tell you what's going to be pessimistic at the moment is Rachel Reeves' future. And if you look at the headlines in the press today, we've got the Mail, Reeves must go for her budget lies, says voters. PM signed off on black hole lies, says the Telegraph. And all sorts of families, this is what the Sunday Express says, families need wages of £71,000 to beat benefits. Let's talk about those black holes because Rachel Reeves has been talking about
Mm.
more black holes than Stephen Hawking ever did, to quote Piers this morning. The OBR said there was no black hole. In fact, there was a surplus. So did Rachel Reeves lie to us?
Well, she claims that she didn't really know this for a while, and that her real problem with the black hole, if you want to call it that, was that she needed to replenish the headroom that is available. So when she was talking about needing to raise a lot of tax and warning the public that this is what she was going to do, it was really to move from a very, very small headroom that she would have had to something which the markets would buy, and she indeed has moved it up from what it was supposed to have been 10 billion, but actually was reduced to about half of that, to about 21 billion. That, of course, required up to a point raising taxes to fill it, and up to a point, very, very serious assumptions that have been made about how much money could perhaps be collected through better work from HMRC, making sure the money comes in that is being owed, and lots of efficiencies, which we all know. Well, I haven't worked myself for the government, that every chancellor says is going to happen, and usually not much of that is achieved.
No, absolutely. Well, but going back to this OBR thing, as we say, we were talking about Laura Kunsberg program this morning when she was grilling the Chancellor about this. It appears the OBR letter was around late October, and so Rachel Reeves knew about the 4.2 billion surplus at that time, but she warned of a 21 billion to 26 billion black hole just days later on November the 4th. Do you see this as a deliberate Treasury misleading to justify tax hikes, or was it a legitimate project fear to manage expectations?
Well, I have to say, it doesn't make much sense because you usually what you do as a chancellor is you frighten everybody and then say everyone is asking me to do this, but I'm not going to do it. But actually, she did raise 26 billion in tax, quite a lot. So, but she's raised them for a different reason. I mean, that's the real issue, and she's raised that in order to pay for taking off the two children benefit cap, actually paying for all the things which they weren't able to push through before, because the assumptions a year ago were that there were going to be the welfare cuts, particularly for people with sort of disability benefits, and there was also going to be the winter fuel allowance that was going to go. All that had to be reversed. So you add all that together, it has meant that you had already lost quite a lot of your headroom. And what she has decided to do is, of course, not just the headroom that had gone, but also the extra policies, such as the two-child benefit cap removal, which costs, 3 billion perhaps, or they might cost a little bit more. But if you add it all up, and the fact that the welfare bill is going up anyway, and the fact that also, when you're raising wages across the economy, then the wages in the public sector go up as well. So all these things which should be accounted for in any case, and the cost of the NHS. I mean, increasingly more money is going into sorting out some of the public services that she has been quite concerned about, and all that, of course, adds up to her needing to raise more. That's how she explains it, but she also explains it in a slightly different way. And you and I have discussed this before. Is really what the OBR is assuming about productivity. And because of the slowdown productivity growth, there's an extra 16 billion that perhaps she would have got, which she's not going to get now by the end of the period. So you've got an explanation of sorts, if you see what I mean. So if you add all that together, we've lost 16 billion. Yes, we're getting a little bit more because of higher wages, which are going to bring in more tax. But in order to make sure that that headroom remains quite a big one so that the markets can lower their yields, then that's going to be a good thing, good news for us all, because servicing the debt will be a little bit less expensive. And also, of course, we might, if we convince the markets that also inflation is going to be going down because of all our measures, the Bank of England will reduce rates faster and we're going to get some faster growth. And then, she said, we'll beat even the reduced forecast of the BR for the future in terms of growth. Well, remains to be seen.
No, absolutely. But why didn't you just say that then? Because clearly the public, there was all this fear mongering about black holes. It was very, very clear. She even called, as Kemi Badenoch pointed out, this emergency press briefing to talk
Mm.
about these black holes. The black holes weren't there. In fact, there was this surplus.
Yes, well, the real problem for all of us economists is that we listened to what she had to say, assumed there was a black hole, because of course we couldn't see what the OBR data was saying. Of course, what we should have done is we should have just looked at what is happening to um, the tax receipts from individuals. The ones from companies haven't been that good, but the ones from individuals, because so many more people are coming into paying more tax because we've had this threshold freeze since 2022. And realize that actually, on that loan, sort of looked better than perhaps we had assumed. And then also calculated, as we were saying anyway, that if she were to freeze further for a few more years, that threshold, she was going to get a lot more money, and that perhaps would solve the problem. So in a way, we are to blame for not pointing it out ourselves. That what black hole are you talking about? So I think we all fell for it. This is the truth. And so we started calculating, what could possibly happen. And we did actually get quite a lot of the things that were suggested. The real problem, of course, for the economy is that all this time that this was happening, the economy had stagnated because everyone was waiting to see. Even people were worried about their own personal tax. People were worried about inheritance tax. People were worried about maybe even capital gains tax for their own property and trying to calculate how that would be. People were moving house because of it. People were waiting for a reduction in stamp duty and postponing some of the things that we're going to do. People were worried, which didn't happen. So people were worried about what was going to happen to interest rates. And for a while, of course, interest rates didn't do particularly well because they were all fearful in the market. So this big black hole, and therefore the fiscal rules were not going to be met. So it did actually affect a large part of the economy and affected it negatively. So people postponed decisions or did things that perhaps now they regret because they needn't have done them. That's no real good way of running a budget process. And it has been sort of painful, I think, for the UK.
Yeah, and I think, as you say, that's what people do. They plan based on this. And I was telling you last time, I don't mind U-turns as long as the circumstances change. But if you turn around and say this is what's going to happen, and people make decisions based on it, they are being misled. The other thing they were misled about is in the manifesto. And again, it was weasel words here. They weren't going to increase taxes for the ordinary working folk. Well, she now says everybody's going to be contributing more. The two statements don't stand together, do they?
No, I agree. If you look at them like that, they don't. But of course, what she claims is that she talked more about rates. So she wasn't going to raise those rates. But in reality, she has raised the rates. First of all, of course, because so many more people are coming into paying a higher rate because they're moving into the higher bracket a lot faster. And second, because she has increased income tax rates for savings income and property income and also dividends, which is another way of getting income in. And she's increased all those by 2%. So there they are. That was not mentioned in her interview this morning. And Laura Kunzberg didn't quite point out that actually you did also increase rates. And that also, of course, when she said a year ago that she wasn't going to carry on with the freeze beyond 2028 because that hurt working people, well, she's reversed that now. There is, however, a real point, and you and I discussed it in one of our previous chats. which is that the markets are still going to look at it quite carefully. And they're going to look at it quite carefully because a lot of the tax increases, all the ones that everyone is talking about now, whether it is the mansion tax, inverted commas, whether it is salary sacrifices for pension contributions, which actually are going to give quite a lot of cash back, if you like. It will reduce the subsidy which the government gives quite substantially. All these things add up. And they add up to a substantial part of what this new headroom is meant to be. But of course, it may not happen. These tax increases may simply not materialize because of the timing or whatever election there may be. And because they are so backloaded, the impact of them, now that everyone knows they're going to happen, at least these things, or supposedly are going to happen, they're going to change their behavior as well. So who knows how much will actually be collected? And even on the mansion tax, if you look at the net loss because of change of behavior, that will happen if people don't do the things they would normally do, and you collect less tax in various areas related to the property because of that. That amount that you'll be collecting, some people are calculating already, instead of somewhere between 400 and 500 million per annum, might well be 300 million or something like that, may even sort of disappear. So there are serious concerns. Or people also on the salary front, sacrifice front, may change what they do, either change jobs or refuse to or perhaps think of putting some pensions in a different way, which will also attract different types of reliefs, who knows, rather than through salary sacrifices, all sorts of stuff which could affect what people do. Plus, of course, you may find that people lose their jobs increasingly. A lot of concern about the impact of the restructuring of business rates on the retail and also the hospitality sector. Yeah. Small firms will suffer. So if they don't employ people, then again, you get all shut down, no corporation tax and no income tax.
So do you think, I mean, as I say, that the headline on the Sunday Express today is that families need wages of 71,000 to beat benefits? And you and I talked about what you want to do is incentivize people to work. Do those figures stack up?
Well, they do, in the sense that, I mean, I've seen a number, but of course one will have to look at them again in more detail. But some of that is already happening, perhaps not that exact figure from the likes of the IFS and resolution validation. So in terms of calculating what if you had kept increasing thresholds in line with inflation, and many people would be better off right now, and now they're paying hugely more tax, and that of course affects everything they do. They are indeed going to be bringing a number of people out of kids out of poverty with removing the 2-child benefit cap, but they could be pushing others down into it, and that's the real concern.
Yeah. Now, we were last time you very kindly took us through the main budget provisions in very simple terms so everybody could do it. One thing we wanted to look at in further detail was the business side. So run us through the changes then, because Rachel Reeves always talk about focusing on growth. That's number one priority. What's the reality?
Well, the truth is that she hasn't really put anything particularly extra. Except looking at areas such as disposal of business assets, which is now going up in terms of tax from 40, or will be from next year, from 14% to 18%. So that capital gains, which was a bit of a sop, if you like, for people who put money into a business and then sell it, that is changing as well to be in line with the rest of the capital gains tax. So there are a number of changes that way. Also, she's softened, that is negative for business, but she's softened a little bit what happens with particularly in the agricultural business sector, where there's more of there's transfer now from one part into another in terms of the threshold that they do have for inheritance tax. So that's good news. It eases things a little bit. She didn't do anything with banks, so the levy on banks is unchanged. She's looking actually as part of this budget sort of music, if you want to call it that, all around it, surrounding it, to deregulate a little bit more. There's been a scrapping of stamp duty on 4 new IPOs for a number of years, so it's a temporary thing. But where it really will hurt, even though what she said sounded good when she said it, is on business rates, which is something you and I sort of touched on. I mean, the interesting thing in previous conversations, I mean, the interesting there is that indeed it is true that she has reduced the business rate, the rate of the business rate, by something I think like 5%. But what she has also done, which wasn't part of what came out with the budget, but came out the following day, is complete revaluation of all the properties on which that rate is charged. And also there was a relief of about 40% for small firms that's going in the new financial year. And this revaluation has actually meant that many outfits now find that they have to pay more rather than less. So that is pretty negative. And for the big firms, or sorry, for the big outlets, I'm talking about outlets now, I'm talking about, how large the premise is that you are using. Sort of warehouse, but also big supermarkets above a certain square footage will pay an extra surcharge. And in order, if you like, to also pay for a transition period, which the government is giving to those changes. So all these things are very unsettling. We've already seen quite a lot of firms, big and small, come out and complain and say that those costs are unbearable. If you add to that what's happening on minimum wage, which is going up very significantly, you do get the impression that certainly the retail and hospitality sector, but loads of other sectors are going to find it quite tough going in over the next few years, despite the extra help which is being given to ensure this transition is not as painful as would otherwise be.
Yeah. And the other thing she emphasized is that we need to look at the details of all of the policies and looking again at the headline and then those details. She promised, as you say, permanently lower business rates based on 2021 valuations with transitional support for hospitality and leisure. Analysis, however, from what I've seen, average pubs are facing 76% hikes by 2028-29 versus 16% for warehouses and 40% pandemic discount ending. She also hailed the golden era for high streets, but owners call it gaslighting, an illusion wiped out by revaluations. Was this detail overlook or deliberate stealth tax hitting SMEs the hardest?
Well, this is precisely what I was covering. You mentioned 2021 valuations. The government argues that those were very low because it was right in the middle of us just getting out of the pandemic, when we had a whole period of nobody going and buying anything, and of course values were all plummeting. So this is a new valuation which has come out, which came out the day after the budget in the morning, and hence why all those recalculations are taking place. And when she says, I encourage you all to look at the detail, but that's the sort of detail, I'm afraid, which is hitting her now, because that can be seriously painful. So the headline, this is what it's always been. And as you know, in my book, Mismanaged Decline, we do talk about honesty and how trust is seriously important. If you're making decisions for the future, you need to believe what you're being told, and the headlines of what you're being told may not actually be the reality when you read the details, when you get a piece of paper, or when your accountant rings up and says, whoops, you've got a bit of a problem. Will the profits be sufficient or your revenue sufficient to cover whatever it is we have to cover, or should we go into serious cost cutting? And there's a lot of pressure in for a number of firms to do precisely that, unfortunately, and that affects all of us.
Yeah, I mean, we always talk about headlines, and as you say, you mentioned that in your brilliant book, and the media, they're all saying that she's got to go now because of these lies. Do you think that's right?
Well, all the papers that you read at the beginning were all sort of, dare one say, towards the right of the political spectrum. So she obviously did what her own party wanted her to do. So from that point of view, there isn't going to be internal pressure now for her to go. So I doubt very much that will happen. Certainly not in the short term.
And that's the interesting point, which others have raised as well, is whether she did this because of the pressure internally to basically look after the welfare state, if you like, to increase that sort of side, to get in the extra money so they can pay all of this out in welfare. Do you think that was that internal policy or internal pressure rather that led to this?
Well, it's a little bit of a coincidence or not, as the case may be, that she U-turned on the income tax increase just when all the political stuff was going on about whether anyone was going to challenge Keir Starmer for the leadership. So yes, I think it is something that the party has liked, and certainly the ones who had been very worried, particularly about the two-child benefit, which I think we all think if it's 3 billion, you get that from gaming duties. Well, I don't know. Perhaps it's sort of justified, but there are all sorts of other things still, unfortunately, which remain slightly schizophrenic in the way in which they have been sold, such as the EV, the extra EV per mile charge, and perhaps there will be more. But once you start down that route, you maybe start going up and up and up in the future to make up for whatever you're going to be losing because people don't drive petrol cars any longer or diesel, and you lose all that duty that you had on it. On the other hand, what was wrong with just raising fuel duty so that for a few years you can actually get a little bit more money in, particularly since oil prices are still quite low despite everything else happening internationally in terms of wars and so on. Yes, you give subsidies on the one hand, and then you for EVs, and then you take money out in a different way. But at least you're beginning to establish a different way of perhaps taxing how people drive, the different modes there are. But what I found quite fascinating is listening to all the programs where various ministers are saying we absolutely need to have this EV thing so we can pay for our roads. There is one interesting thing. I mean, EVs are, first of all, indeed heavier because of the batteries, so they do more damage to the roads. But the idea that anything that the government collects gets hypothecated in order to be used for something else is pie in the sky, really. I mean, a lot of that money will go into servicing our debt rather than anything else. I would quite like to see the roads improve, and for that, yes, I'd be hugely in favor of an EV tax. Not huge evidence of that. If anything, things, well, seem to be getting worse. How many times have we been promised there'll be money for potholes? Well, I think it would be
I think
good to go around.
we always make that point, don't we, Vicky, that if people understand, look, okay, this is money's coming in here, it's going to be spent here, and we can see it. The other point that you made last time that we chatted about this is the time difference between the spending
Mm.
and when the money's coming in. Just remind us what those time differences are.
Well, I was talking more about what happens when you're trying to invest, which takes a long time for that to have an impact on the economy. That was one thing. And the second one, of course, as far as this budget is concerned, is how much later the taxes are happening, the tax increases, and how much of the spending on welfare, national health service, and so on is front loaded. And that's what's going to worry the markets later. If, of course, the economy does better, there is more tax that is collected because interest rates are going to come down and everyone's going to feel a lot more confident, it's going to go out and invest, that's fine. But if you are still depending on some of those taxes being collected later in the period that we're looking at, then one will begin to think, well, if things do not go according to plan in terms of growth, this is going to need to come back if the markets cease being convinced of the ability that she has demonstrated she thinks is there and we can do it, increase that headroom quite significantly. Again, remember, apparently she had a headroom with the best forecast of the OBR just before the final measures were put through of 4.5 billion. Well, now we're talking about 21.7, I think, or thereabouts. So that's quite an increase. And I think that will be scrutinized quite carefully as the years, go by, as to say. So to see whether, in fact, she can keep it. So there are these issues, and the impact on spending, and getting the return that you want, which is absolutely essential, because that mustn't be forgotten. A lot of the spending that is done, say, on children, improving their welfare, that improves their health, it improves how they do at school, it then improves their outcomes later. That could take decades. And what, again, we say in the book, Mismanaged Decline, is that there has to be a different way in which you calculate these things, and you put the money in expecting that to have an impact in the longer term, because that, of course, improves growth, improves even revenues, tax revenues. So the way to try and get that out of the political cycle would really be very useful. Unfortunately, as we've seen with austerity in the 2010s and so on, and the various booms and busts that we've had before, that is forgotten, and that leaves us with policies which simply are not consistent and don't lead to long-term growth in the economy.
And the other thing that she talked about was resilience, and she quoted investments from JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and talked about the co-op loving this because they've now cut the price of 2,700 items, is what she says, as a result of the budget. But there was no single measure, was there, basically aiding growth, which we sort of touched on.
Well, I still have to understand what the budget did to encourage the co-op to reduce its prices, unless it is decided that life is going to be so hard, we might as well compete against the others by just reducing our prices and having all the customers come to us. But I have to look at that more carefully. I don't see any evidence of any cuts happening that would have helped them. But still, maybe I've misunderstood the way the business rates work. But I'm going to look at it again, which is really our job. But there was absolutely nothing on growth in this particular one. And everything that happened last year was anti-growth, except for the investment that she intended to put. And this is really what you and I had talked before, which is that investment takes a long time to have an impact on the economy, even though, of course, the OBR has calculated some of the benefits last year of what was happening. So even, looking at what you may intend to do on housing, that in itself could add to growth for the future. So it's an investment on housing. That, of course, means a lot more people get involved in building those houses. A lot of that is locally very helpful. So housing is about the one thing that really helps the regions more, because you do the housing in that particular place, wherever that is. You use local people, you use local resources. Yes, perhaps you bring in a few things that you may need from abroad, but generally it's pretty domestically oriented. And it's good news. And of course, it allows for people to move to the places where, and industries to move to places where they can get the workers, where people can commute easily. Infrastructure is equally important. All these sort of things, which again we talk about in the book, which are pretty standard economic, rational decisions to make. The question is, do you account for those in your growth figures? Do you account for those in terms of the revenues you may be able to get in the future from those? The OBI has changed a little bit the way it looks at that, but this particular year, it hasn't really done very much of that at all. So it hasn't looked at the measures it did look at the measures from a growth potential, didn't find any which met their threshold. So what Richard Reeves says, all combined might actually make a big difference. Well, remains to be seen.
Yeah. Now, some people have sort of said it's signaling a fresh confidence in growth, and there has been this sort of analysis, including in the Times. If you look at social media, you've got people like pub landladies are showing bills are jumping 291%, somebody said, from 22,000 to 86,000. Richard Tice, Reform UK's, says it's calling a deliberate crash. And obviously, Kemi Badenoch was quite savage in her attack on Rachel Reeves, calling for her resignation. Has it put the government in a better position for business, or exposed them and exposed their sort of lies and credibility?
Well, the government has left some businesses feeling quite happy because they haven't been attacked additionally, or at all. In fact, the financial sector was left alone last year as well. Deregulation, as I mentioned, is one of the things they've been asking for, and they're getting some of that. And I mentioned also the stamp duty issue. She hopes to get more IPOs, and we're going to hear more about deregulation in the next few weeks on that, including on capital requirements for banks. So there is certainly that move that's taking place. So that sector is reasonably happy. The energy sector more generally, the windfall tax on doesn't seem to have been taken off. So there was big pressure to do that. That didn't happen. So that's a sector which isn't going to be particularly happy. There is nevertheless a bit of a change in terms of investing in North Sea oil. So that seems to be moving in the direction that perhaps we will have a little bit more. There's a definition of what we mean. Is it a new field, or is it something which is an extension of something else you have, just to get around the problems that there might be your attack, that you're going back on your clean energy policies. Also, the fact that they're taking the green levies out, that is interesting too. If you just combine the new attitude, well, softened attitude to North Sea, I think the way I'm interpreting it, I may be proven completely wrong, but that's what it looks like. And taking out the levies from bills is also a positive thing. So it seems to align to that. So at least we got there a little bit. But then you've got other sectors where nothing much has happened. The whole electricity cost reduction initiative for 7,000 firms to begin with, and extending to a larger number for all these energy intensive sectors seems to be not necessarily stalling, but it seems to be very slow. So a number of things are not happening fast enough. And then, of course, you've got the entire hospitality and up to point retail sector, depending, also worried about costs, increasing costs with minimum wage, and also the business rate issue. So I wouldn't call it business friendly as a budget, but at least it has an added huge extra cost across the board, but it has affected some sectors worse than others.
Yeah. And she talked about change. I always make the point that the only change that people care about is the change in their pocket, and there's going to be less of that at the moment. Finally, I always promise you this as an enticement to come on the show regularly. You must plug your brilliant book. Tell us where it is, what it's about, and why people should buy it.
But it's extremely kind of you. Well, it touches on some of the issues we've just been talking about. How do you get investment in this country, and how do you do policy in a way which people understand and believe, and also that leads to the right outcomes in the end? How you can take politics perhaps slightly out of the picture, and also get rid of ideology. There's so much of that around, and you've seen that also in the attacks that happen from one party to another, and you're left wondering, what will happen next if there's a change of government. I mean, that's not very healthy for an economy. I'm not suggesting that we are different to others, but we do talk it in the book about mismanaged decline, about how we started from being the sort of work house, if you want to call it that, of the world, into being sort of quite weak and dependent on loads of others to ensure that we continue doing sort of reasonably well, having lost the empire, and then having all these competitors out there right now. And I think it's really interesting what's happening with our suggested reset with Europe, that we find that even in the area where we have strengths such as defense, where we have some really strong companies, we just at the point now of having not made it much progress in getting closer to all the spending that is going to happen in Europe. We get a little bit of it, but it is a huge opportunity for us to become more entrenched into what happens in Europe, particularly with all the problems all around us, and we just obviously too small, too weak, and insignificant, or at least that's perhaps what some of the Europeans would think since we left the EU, or at least our voice isn't heard anything like as much, despite stammers, and we have to accept that diplomatic foreign efforts that he has made on Ukraine and elsewhere. So we have played a role, but to turn that into an economically supportive new set of relationships with Europe, we seem to be very slow in getting there, and perhaps there isn't clear understanding that that's what we need to do. So thinking again, going back to what was resilience, what we need is good trading partners. We need more trade. We need obviously more competition, but we also need people to move in and out easily as they used to do. And you've seen the latest migration figures suggest that the EU migration is negative. And the most worrying thing of all, perhaps, I think you and I discussed it before, is how many Brits are leaving the UK. And the migration figures, which are quite low now in terms of net immigration into the UK, also take into account how many Brits or people who were permanent residents in the UK have just decided to just take all and go, which is a real worry if we're seen to be the sort of place that you need to abandon. That's not good news.
Not good news at all. I hope you get good news this afternoon in your football match. Or
Thank you.
we'll see what happens there. But for now, Vicky Pryce, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.